Good afternoon and welcome to Across the Fence. I'm Keith Silva in for Fran Stoddard. Halloween is fast approaching and we here at Across the Fence wanted to get in on all the spooky and ghoulish fun. And we thought there's no one better to hang out with in the virtual pumpkin patch than UVM English professor Tony Magistrale. Tony has been studying and teaching at the horror and Gothic literature in popular culture at the University of Vermont for the past 4 decades. As a teacher, Tony is no stranger to giving assignments, but today we've tasked him with providing a list of his top 10 horror movies. Tony, it's a pleasure to have you back talking with us about all things that go bump in the night. We'll let folks know we are going to talk about these movies fairly in depth, so there's your spoiler warning. But let's get on with it. Your number 1 pick for this list, Tony.
Do you want me to go from number 10?
Let's go number 10. Yeah, let's start with 10.
Let's start with number 10, which is Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 film Psycho. The reason I picked Psycho, I think, is because I think it opens the door to modern horror. It's specifically the slasher film, which becomes such a big genre in the 1970s. It opens the door to Halloween, Friday the 13th, a lot of those films that everybody has heard of, if not appreciates. Mm-hmm. It's also the first film I think that I want to talk about in terms of Poe, because Alfred Hitchcock's favorite author was Edgar Allan Poe, and so many of the films that he did in the 1960s, the American films, were shaped strongly by Poe's presence.
Very strong Poe presence. There's raven or birds in Psycho, so that makes sense. Speaking of slashers, number 9, the slasher of all slashers.
Nightmare on Elm Street, number 9. Had to include this one because I think it's a Freddy's combination of horror and humor are a perfect mix. Mm-hmm. It's a tale that speaks primarily to young people's nightmares. Nightmares about their presence in suburbia, their presence in the family, but also their connection to sexuality. It's, I guess I would call it slumber interruptus. How's that?
At number 8, you've got one that I have to admit I'm too scared to watch, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Number 8.
That Texas Chainsaw Massacre is the first, I think, of the great slasher films. Cheaply made, very intense, a lot of action base. It's I guess I would call it one of those films that deals with the predominance of machinery, power tools that turn into horror, if you will.
Right.
Raw, visceral. I had to have one of these on the list.
And a rarity for a horror movie. It takes place in the daytime mostly, which is one of those things about Texas Chainsaw that's so interesting. Three psychopathic killers to start off our list. We're off to a good start. What comes in at number 7?
Number 7, we go back to the classics, okay? We go back to Nosferatu. Now, a calming influence, if ever there was one. Nosferatu. Nosferatu is the first horror film that's produced in the 1920s by F.W. Murnau. Yep. And there's a wonderful picture of him on the screen. Yep. That's Nosferatu, not Murnau.
Right.
Okay? No sound, just an array of haunted images that are captured in the best sense of the German expressionism.
Right.
Nosferatu as a figure of the vampire. Right. Max Schreck plays Nosferatu, and Schreck's name in German means scream.
Excellent. Excellent. I would be remiss if I didn't mention at this point that there's a great movie called What We Do in the Shadows. My daughters are big fans of both the TV show and the movie, and there's a great riff on Nosferatu in those films and in that show. From a silent era classic to a recent masterpiece, this is an early one on your list. Number 6 is It Follows. Tell me about
It
that.
follows. I have to admit, I was very impressed by it when I saw it recently, and it stuck with me after my first viewing of it.
Mm,
A powerful film about explicit sexuality under scrutiny.
mm,
The horror film is always a genre that's a reminder of the dangers in crossing into the taboo. And sexuality is always one of the great taboos that one finds in the horror genre.
absolutely.
Its monster, as ambiguous and amorphous as it is, its monster is perhaps a metaphor for an STD or unwanted pregnancy, or maybe just the loss of innocence.
Anything. It works.
It
It
works.
works. It works. Okay, we're halfway through, and following It Follows, a perfect number 5.
It. That's
It.
right. What has become one of the great Stephen King classics, especially in its revival.
Mm,
Um, Wonderful monster about in league with an entire main city. King is at his best in creating an underworld alternative universe
right.
where friendship has to survive in the place of an adult void. A really powerful film that was divided into two parts, and I think both parts are good.
Hmm.
And it was a smart move to do because it's a long novel.
It,
So well done film.
it's a doorstop and a King classic.
King classic.
We'll reveal your number 1 in just a few minutes. I want to say that your number 4, which we're going to talk about, would be my number 1. So what is number 4 on the list?
The Exorcist.
The Exorcist.
Yeah, I mean, anyone from the baby boom generation was scared, very highly scared. We'll just leave it at that. With The Exorcist, it sticks in our collective memory. The best of the possession films,
Mm-hmm.
an attack on bourgeois culture and society when Pazuzu, the demon, finds cracks in a broken family and finds his way in to wreak havoc on a suburban Washington mother and daughter.
I don't want to date you, but did you see this in the theater?
I did not.
You did not. Okay.
Not
Okay.
this. I came to this later on after all the hoopla had already started.
Aha, I think that's what we were talking about, the hoopla. And I didn't see it in the theater either, so
Yeah.
I don't want to date either of us. Another
I would
vampire.
say, Keith, one more thing
Yep,
about The Exorcist.
sure.
It's remarkable. It shows you that what is horrible for one generation is not necessarily horrible for another.
Hmm,
We found this to be a terrifying film, the baby boom generation.
right.
Kids today, Generation X, look at it and laugh.
Huh. I don't laugh. I'm not a baby boomer. So another vampire movie comes in at number 3. Another more recent film. Tell me about Let the Right One In.
Let the right one in. I'm particularly fond of the Swedish version of this
Mm-hmm.
because I think what's interesting about this is that we think of Sweden and we think of the welfare state, of the welfare state that puts children in particular at the top of their of the top of importance and needs.
Right.
And this is a film that where adults are only present as victims,
Mm-hmm.
and children have to rely on each other. I think in some very real and subtle way, this is also an attack on the Swedish welfare state at the same time as it's a vampire.
Interesting. And it translates very well. It was made into an American remake that was
That's right.
excellent. And now, I guess, a Showtime television series. So great idea, great original novel, and a great pick by you. Number
Thank
2, some folks might think of this as science fiction, but you call it horror. What's number 2?
I would call it a hybrid, Keith.
Okay.
If you want to get technical here, it's an example of how the horror genre has always been a hybrid form. It bonds easily with other genres: detective fiction, science fiction, fantasy, epic. All of those things are part of the horror genre, or at least connected to it. Jump scares galore. The monster is held off in the background, allowing our imaginations to do the work and lift and do the heavy lifting.
Absolutely. And also a good movie about work. If you were talking about the Swedish welfare state, Alien's got a big undercurrent of work and what it means to be a worker, labor versus unions in some ways. All right, here we go. Number one. What is your number one pick for Tony's top 10 horror?
Hard not to keep this off the list, because everybody's list is The Shining. Any list of horror films, The Shining comes in as part of the top 10. For me, it's number one. Mm-hmm. Family under siege in one of Kubrick's masterpieces. The terror, if you will, of a clean, well-lighted place. All the action that takes place in The Shining is in open spaces that are very well lit.
Yep, absolutely. So I think a good.
I guess, Keith, I would also add that it's another possession film.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's similar to The Exorcist.
Yeah, absolutely. Another baby boom favorite. I think a good English student could figure out what the themes are here, but what do you want in a horror movie? What do you like?
Well, I tried to include a wide variety of different kinds of horror films in making this top list. But I think if I had to talk about my preference in horror movies, it would be the narratives of psychological assault rather than those that deal with explicit examples of visceral guts and gore. Mm-hmm. I want my horror to possess multiple subtext. I want it to have all sorts of ways of reading as a metaphor. Okay. A metaphor for social, familial, sexual, all of these tensions that are put under a microscope at any given time.
More so than just monsters coming at you, that sort of thing. Or
except for the alien.
Except for and vampires. Let's not forget our friends the vampires. They are definitely metaphors, if nothing else. Well, Tony, thank you very much. Tony and I encourage you to go to your local library where you can find many of these movies we've talked about today. I want to thank director Adam Wright for helping us with the graphics on today's program. And as always, thank you for stopping by Across the Fence. Happy Halloween, everyone.
Woo!